Okay, freshmen, for the purpose of this lecture, we are going to start talking through economic systems. Our past couple class periods, you guys have been focusing on types of government. We've been looking at comparing democracy, monarchies, dictatorships, and communist government, looking at some of the demographics and other um, pieces of the population, information about the population that might give us some, maybe allow us to draw some conclusions on what it's like in that particular country. And then getting into the economy today. So when we start talking about economic systems, we are looking at how a nation, how a country manages its resources, how it provides for its people as far as consumer goods, and ideas of that nature. Okay, so our most basic type of economy is what you call a traditional economy. A traditional economy is the most basic type in the sense of it's the most indigenous. It is probably trading good for good. Most people that live in a traditional economy are probably going to grow their own food or raise their own food if you're talking about livestock. And again, most of this is based on tradition. So you're looking at a very kind of archaic type of economy where it's something where people probably aren't using Venmo to transfer cash to one another for the purpose of buying goods, but they're probably bartering good for good and things of that nature. So what happens? What happens here then is you're not going to have a lot of excess goods. You're not going to have a lot of surplus. You're probably just going to have what you need. But when you think of a traditional economy, kind of think of it as being more so indigenous, something that maybe native peoples would use. Okay, talk about free market economy. That is kind of what we have in the United States, kind of not. But when you think of a free market economy, think that the government has very little say so in anything. Primarily, the economy will be ran by the businesses and by the consumers, and it's based on the ideas of laws of supply and demand. That suppliers, businesses are going to supply X amount of goods and hope that consumers have a demand for those goods. If there is no demand for those goods, that business will have a hard time selling those things. But ultimately, the businesses are going to attempt to produce what the consumers want to meet consumer demand. And again, this type of economy has the least amount of government intervention. Okay, we talk about a command economy. This is something that you would probably see in a more so communist or dictatorship type of nation. Command or essentially planned economy, where everything is decided by the government. The government decides what is produced, when it's produced, how it's produced, and ultimately who gets to consume it. So in an old nation like the Soviet Union, say for example, Russia, when Russia was still the Soviet Union, what happened there, they were a command economy. That's a very good example. Is they laid a lot of railroad tracks. They also built a lot of factories, and their interstate highway systems got better, and all these different infrastructure pieces improved a lot. However, they didn't really produce a lot of consumer goods, and sometimes food was not on the top of the priority list because they were trying to build weapons of war and cement plants and whatever else. And so because of that, because the government made those decisions, that ultimately led to things like food shortages and some things like that. But understand, in a command economy, the government has the ultimate say so. And again, economy and type of government, they're two very different things, right? Government is looking at how we divide our governmental powers, and economy is looking at how we manage resources as a nation. So there is maybe a correlation between the two, but again, type of government and type of economy are two very different things. Now, oftentimes in a communist government, you will see something like a command economy. Just like in a democracy, you're going to see something that's a little bit more free market or mixed. So let's talk about mixed economy. This is what the United States would classify as a mixed economy. We are capitalist, right? Free market ideas, but our government does regulate our economy in the United States with things like minimum wage and labor laws and how we get rid of waste products and some of these different things. And so because our government has some regulating powers in our economy, we have a mixed economy in the United States. And as a matter of fact, a true free market economy does not exist anywhere in the world. A place like Hong Kong or Singapore out in Asia, they have free markets, quote unquote, some of the freest markets in the world, but the idea of no government intervention whatsoever, it's not really a thing. All economies have some element of government intervention. But a mixed economy, again, combines the elements of free market and command, where the government gets some regulating power. In nations like Sweden, say for example, they use what's called market socialism. So the government has a higher degree of regulating powers than the government of the United States does in the United States economy. Okay, when socialism is, again, it's kind of sometimes oftentimes the United States we kind of think of it as being a yucky word, but when you start talking about government regulations and governments providing certain goods and such, that's to a degree is socialism. So keep that in mind here as we go on. Also talk about economic activities and some of these other things. So we have 4 different types we'll talk about. So a primary economic activity would be gathering of raw materials. So like in a traditional economy, you're going to see a lot of primary economic activity where these the people that live in that economy, they're going to gather their raw materials so that they can produce, whether it be clothing or whether it be food or whatever. That's a primary economic activity. A secondary economic activity is adding value to those materials by changing the form. So in a traditional economy, people might gather fabric to make clothes, okay? By changing that fabric into a shirt or whatever it might be, that is something that is giving that fabric a higher degree of value, okay? Tertiary, and usually in a traditional economy, you'd probably see it stop right there. Okay, they're going to change their form slightly and then try to sell them or barter or however. But tertiary, okay, this involves when you have business or professional services that do something else. So like me as a school teacher, I'm a tertiary economic activity. Okay, and then we have quaternary, and this is going to be like your upper level management and those people, the corporate head of bigwigs. Okay, quaternary economic activities. Here's just a little diagram here of the different economic systems, right? So we talked through. I guess we talked through 4 of them, but kind of going off of these. So a traditional economy, again, you're going to oftentimes have a smaller group of people, your families. They're going to have whatever it makes for their personal consumption. They're going to try to waste very little, and they're going to try to, trade less. But, at some point they might have to barter good for good. So in a market economy, right, you have consumers, you have businesses, you have the laws of supply and demand and how those affect both the consumers and the private enterprises, the business, and ultimately that's going to determine price and what gets produced and such. When you start talking about a mixed economy, this is where you kind of have the intersection here of supply, demand, consumers, and business, and government regulations that kind of affect some of these things as well. So if we wanted to say market / mix with the government regulations, that's something we can do. And then in a command economy, it's simply the government. Okay, the government's the head, and they determine who owns the businesses, how those businesses are operating, and ultimately what they're producing. Okay, so if you have any questions, please email me. You guys have a good rest of your day. Remember that we have a test coming up on Thursday, period 3, you are testing, and on Friday this week, period 5, you are testing. All right, let me know if you have questions.